In the last video, we looked at the relation between symbols and thought or symbols and thinking, and we saw that even in the 16th and 17th century, the philosophers were theorizing the fact or hypothesizing the fact that thinking is basically the manipulation of symbols in our head essentially. So, we will go forward with that idea and try to define what do we mean by uh, something called physical symbol systems, which was described by two scientists in the last century, Simon and Newell. Okay, so we already said that a symbol is something which stands for something else. So now we are kind of clarifying that. We are saying that a symbol is a perceptible something that you can sense, because it's a basic unit for communication, that uh, you create a symbol and somebody else perceives it essentially. So, a symbol is something that stands for something else. So, we have seen alphabet symbols, numerals, road signs, musical notation and so on. A symbol system is a collection of symbol systems. It is a pattern of those symbol elements essentially. So, words and arrays and lists or even a musical tune can be thought of as a symbol system. And when we say a physical symbol system, what we mean that just like the physical world obeys some laws, the symbol systems will also obey some laws of manipulation essentially. So, for example, how to do addition, or as we will see more this thing, how to make logical inferences. So, there is this hypothesis called the physical symbol system hypothesis. It is credited to Alan Newell and Herbert Simon, who were pioneering AI researchers at CMU at the time when CMU itself was being created. Uh, and they wrote a very influential book called Human Problem Solving, in which they tried to study how humans solve problems. Simon was an economist by training. In fact, he got a Nobel Prize for that. Newell was his student, and they did a lot of work together at CMU. What they said was that a physical symbol system has a necessary and sufficient means for general intelligent action. That if you can represent things using symbols, and if you can manipulate them using some algorithms, then that is enough to create, as we would say nowadays, AI, to 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 create machines which can have intelligent action essentially. Both necessary and sufficient. You don't need anything else, but it's also necessary. According to Newell and Simon, uh, you cannot create intelligence without representing things in a symbolic manner. And we had talked about that when we were talking about the introduction essentially. And that is what this course is all about. Uh, so, the ability to manipulate symbols is called symbolic AI or classical AI, and Hogeland has called it good old fashioned AI, GOFAI, which is in contrast to modern AI, which people think is only machine learning. So, let us look at symbols. As I said, symbols are used for communication, and communication is commonplace amongst living creatures, not just human beings. Birds have wide variety of songs. Obviously, or at least one can hypothesize that they are singing it for other birds. Whales communicate across long distances, which is known to be a fact. Dogs wag their tails and bark at their strangers. Now, some people might say that this is their inherent behavior, that dogs behave in a certain way, just like a weaver bird has it genetically learned how to weave its nest, which is an exquisite structure. All these animals behave in some intrinsic manner and so on, but nevertheless they are using these sounds to communicate. And we can even go ahead and say that there is intentionality behind their communication, that when a dog sees its owner and wags its tails, it is really happy and is trying to convey in some sense the fact that it is happy, or at least it is very happy essentially. Or if it sees a stranger prowling around near your gate and then it starts barking, uh, it's probably there is some intentionality behind there. Anyway, we do not want to get into that. Humankind is the only species that consciously uses symbols to represent information. Okay. Ants leave symbols like pheromone trails, but they do not do it consciously. It is their behavior, it is their nature essentially. But we do it consciously essentially. Uh, it is possible that other animals, more likely primates, also do it, but we are not arguing about humans versus the rest of the uh, animal kingdom here. What we are talking about is that humans have shown signs of being intelligent, though of course many people would question that given the state of the world. But we want to investigate how that intelligence can be created. So, talking about symbols, the earliest humans known to engrave symbols. So, we are talking moving towards written, the written word. Of course, language emerged out of more basic sounds, but the written word is something which has made civilization possible essentially. Once you write down stuff, somebody 20 years later can read it also. So, the earliest humans known to engrave symbols on clay were the Sumerians in ancient Mesopotamia, which many people consider to be the cradle of civilization in what is modern day Iraq. The first engravings were pictographs and they were found in many parts of the world, but soon evolved into more abstract entities like symbols from an alphabet essentially. One of the earliest scripts or languages, or more like scripts, that was developed in the ancient world was called cuneiform, and you can read about that in this article on the web called the world's oldest writing. First developed around 3200 BC by Sumerian scribes in the ancient city state of Uruk, which is in present day Iraq. As a means of recording transactions, cuneiform writing was created by using a reed stylus to make wedge shaped indentations in clay tablets. Now, even as I was preparing my slides for this recording, there was this news that the US has recently returned one of the earliest clay tablets which was stolen from Iraq during the Iraq invasion. And this is a clay tablet which is called the Gilgamesh tablet. Gilgamesh was an ancient king, and this tablet apparently narrates the exploits of bravery or whatever about Gilgamesh. And this has been recently in 2021 returned back to Iraq. Now, cuneiform as a robust writing tradition endured 3000 years. The script, see, cuneiform is not a script, it's not a language, it's a script which is used to symbolize something else, which is language, which is that sounds have certain meanings essentially. That an apple is a sound which means the fruit apple, but it can be written in different scripts essentially. Okay, I mean we would use the Roman alphabet, but you could have written it in, for example, in Hindi newspapers, people do use the Devanagari script to write English words. I think so that can be done. Cuneiform was not a language; it was a script, and it was used by different languages. Multiple cultures over time to write a number of languages other than Sumerian, most notably the Akkadian, a Semitic language that was the lingua franca of the Assyrian and the Babylonian empires. Alphabetic writing, where the markings that you make are from a well defined alphabet. So, we have the English alphabet, we have the Hindi alphabet and so on and so forth, or the Devanagari alphabet and the Roman alphabet. That came a little bit later, towards the 1st century AD. So, we are heading towards language. The breakthrough came when symbols were not only employed as images of representing objects and events like a hunt. I mean, that is one of the most famous kind of cave paintings one talks about, some humans with spears, chasing something which looks like a oxen or a bull or something like that. But the breakthrough came when symbols stood for abstract entities like sounds. So, A, B, C, D or K, K, G, G, whatever. These are sounds which were used to put together to form words, and words were put together to form sentences essentially. So, the ability to write alphabet gave a great impetus to language, and then of course, literature and science and everything. The spoken word had become the written word essentially. Different languages evolved in many different regions of the world, and the common theme was writing essentially, that came with the written word essentially. Our interest is in computing machines. So, I mean, our goal in AI is to make machines think, to make them intelligent essentially. And this quest has been there for a while, to for humans to create machines which can do useful computation for them. Initially, we started with mathematical calculations, which was the idea of computing in those days. But more grandly, we want to create machines which can think. So, the earliest machines which were built for, let us say, calculation or computation, as they said in that time, were non-symbolic machines in the sense that they do not represent symbols explicitly essentially, but somehow, a little bit like how, of course, this was conscious activity, but somehow how the ant subconsciously leaves a pheromone trail which is interpreted by other ants to be the path to where the food is essentially. So, the earliest machines were also did not use symbols explicitly. They would use things like gears essentially. Of course, gears have a built-in digital element to them, because they have their wheel, the teeth, and if you can think of one teeth as counting one number, then the number of teeth that you have would kind of in some way represent numbers essentially, but not explicitly. Charles Babbage, who is credited to be the father of computers, if not the father of computing, he was a mechanical engineer in the sense that all his experiments were done in machines of iron and steel, and one of his famous machine called the difference engine did use symbols in the sense that it used punched cards. Now, punched cards were not invented by Babbage, they were used in France, for example, in weaving. So, they were a mechanism which could give input to the loom as to what is the pattern that you want to weave in a cloth essentially. So, the origin of this stored program concept, or the origin of a flexible computing machine or a universal machine as people have called it, was that you could load different sets of instructions into the same machine and it could do different things for you essentially. That is how we get the idea of a general purpose machine. And Babbage did use punched cards. So, in some sense there were some elements of symbolic communication there. And of course, in modern day times the electronics, the machines have become more and more digital, they have become more and more symbol manipulating. We take it for granted that the digital computer operates on zeros and ones. Our goal is to rise out of that sea of zeros and ones. If you have looked at code, binary code, it is quite undecipherable for us, and we would be much happier if the machines operated at our level of representation rather than their level of representation, which is strings of zeros and ones. And that is our goal in computer science in general, inventing different programming languages, and of course AI essentially. Ideally, we would be able to tell a machine something in natural spoken language, and it would do what we wanted it to do essentially. Language and logic preceded computers. Okay, we will start with that study, and our quest of course is to impart both these capabilities, the ability to deal with language, and by language we mean natural language, kind of language that we use for communication between ourselves, and logic. Logic is something, because we will see that because of its preciseness, is something that is very attractive essentially. So, we begin with some more history, mechanical arithmetic. How can you make machines do the sums that human beings or human computers, as they were called, would sit on a table and do essentially? So, Pascal, who is of course a well known scientist, we have Pascal's law and we have a language named after Pascal's, invented the mechanical calculator using lantern gears, and this was in 1642. He did of course lot of experiments. All inventors have to go through a lot of experimenters. What we finally see is the final product, and he presented his first machine to the public in 1645. He called it the arithmetic machine, or Pascal's calculator, or later it was called the Pascaline. And this calculated machine could add and subtract two numbers directly and multiply and divide by repetition essentially. So, there is an image of the Pascaline here for you. He received the royal privilege which gave him the exclusive rights to make and sell the calculating machines in France, but it was an expensive proposition. By 1654, Pascal had sold about 20 machines, but it was not something which would sustain essentially, and he kind of stopped making them. The person to take forward mechanical computing was Leibniz. Leibniz is another great scientist that we have got so much from. He started work on his own machine after Pascal's death, and he invented what is called the Leibniz wheel or the stepped drum in 1673, which was used for over 3 centuries until the advent of the electronic calculators. You can see how far reaching that invention was, and you can see this invention in this small animation on the left. You can see that there is a spindle like thing with a gear on it, and then there is a drum which has got steps of different size, different lengths. The drum rotates, and depending on where that gear is located, the gear will rotate an appropriate number of turns or times, if you want to say. So, if you look carefully at this, you will see that this gear rotates 3 times, 1, 2, 3, and then the 4th step misses it. So, in some sense this gear at this setting has counted up to 3 essentially. So, you can see where we are heading. We can now think of machines which can handle numbers essentially. Now, obviously, if you were to move this gear back and forth, then it would count different numbers. The more to the right you go, the larger would be the number it would count, because the number of times then the step would hit it would increase essentially. So, that was a invention that called the Leibniz wheel or the step drum, which was used in calculating machines for a very long time. So, his machine called the stepped reckoner was a digital mechanical calculator invented by Leibniz around 1672 and completed in 1694. It could perform multiplication by repeated addition and division by repeated subtraction, and it could work with 8 digit numbers. Okay. The earliest digital computers also were small word lengths, they worked with 8 bit numbers. So, this is we are talking about 8 digit numbers. So, and here is an image of a step reckoner, and it was used up to the early part of the last century before the electronic calculating machines were invented. Of course, if we are talking about mechanical computing, we cannot but talk about Charles Babbage and his inventions. We already have mentioned the difference engine. What we are talking about here is the analytic engine, and you can see how intricate the mechanical system is on the picture on the left, and this is a machine which is displayed at the Science Museum in London. If you happen to go there, you should definitely go and take a look, but thankfully in modern times you do not have to go there, you can just go to the internet and you will find not only images of the analytic machine and the difference engine, the analytic engine and the difference engine, but also working models with videos showing how they used to operate, and it is quite fascinating, even though it is very cumbersome to use those devices. The thing about the analytic engine, which is the precursor of our general purpose computer, was that it was a mechanical general purpose computer. What do we mean by general purpose? By general purpose, we mean that the computer, the machine remains the same, but you can make it do different things. Unlike many machines that we have, for example, if you have a ceiling fan, it can only rotate and move the air around for you. It can't do anything else essentially. However sophisticated the machine might be. I had a friend who was once admiring a music system I had, and then as a kind of a joke he said that can it cook, but of course that stage has not yet come. So, this is the analytic engine by Charles Babbage. It was described in 1837. So, quite some time ago, almost 200 years ago, not quite, but as a successor of his difference engine, the analytic engine had all the features that a modern digital computer can have. It had something like an arithmetic and logic unit which does the computation. It had control flow as to how to flow the computation, as to whether to do this sequence of actions or whether to do that sequence of actions. It had conditional branching, it had loops, it had an integrated memory, making it the first design for a general purpose computer that could be described in modern terms as Turing complete. So, when you say Turing complete, we mean everything that a Turing machine can do essentially. So, if you have studied a little bit of computer science, you would know that the Turing machine is a model of a general purpose computer, that anything that can be computed by any machine can be computed by a Turing machine. So, we have looked at symbols and their relation to thought, and we have looked at how symbols can be manipulated, or how philosophers thought that symbols are manipulated in our heads essentially, and then how philosophers or scientists, if you want to call them now, people like Leibniz, tried to implement this kind of processing capabilities, computation capabilities, mechanical computing, into the only machines that we knew of that time, which was mechanical machines. So, everything that happened in medieval Europe was essentially mechanical in the sense that it was built by metal essentially. and this idea of the digital computer came only in the last century, as we know. So, what we will do now is to look at the origins of logic. So, we have seen that there is a connection between symbols and thinking. Hopefully, there is a connection at least in human beings, but what when we come to machines like the digital computer, we have no other possibility but to represent symbols in some fashion essentially. How we represent things in our head is still not clear in our human heads. Uh, of course, it is there in some very complex network of neurons in our heads in the form of some uh, large network of neurons, and many people have said that the human brain is the most complex piece of matter on in the universe. So, we do not really know how we represent symbols in our head. So, if you look at Hofstadter's book that I mentioned earlier, you might get some insight into what possibly could be there. But when it comes to digital computers, we have no option but to represent things using zeros and ones, and eventually interpret them in some more esoteric fashion. So, we will now move next to logic, and study logic and then see reasoning, how reasoning is done in logic essentially, and then move on to other things.